All right, for today's project, we're going to be making the Market Shopper Tote. Excuse my dog, she's having an anxiety attack about not being in here with me. This tote is awesome. This is kind of modeled after the reusable totes that you get everywhere. But I wanted something a little more sturdy that would last a little bit longer and was a little cuter. And so I came up with this Market Shopper Tote. It is quilted and I used flex foam on the inside so it stands up on its own. And it is sewn with the seams on the outside so that we can bind them with some really cute fabric. So we've got some pink gingham going on. We've got some really sweet cream colored fabric that's got little pink flowers and green and teal leaves on it. And I use that for the handles also. It's an easy project technical wise, as far as like skills on how to put a bag like this together is very easy. What is not easy or a little more challenging would be quilting such a large piece of flex foam. It's a little finicky to finagle under the sewing machine. It can be done though. It can be done on a domestic machine. Flex foam is very forgiving and quite easy to sew through. But having such a large piece to maneuver around through your sewing machine can be a little bit challenging. So I'm going to say that this is an intermediate or a very adventurous beginner, experienced beginner project, because technically the bag is very simple, but like I said, finagling this one large piece of foam, trying to quilt it, is a little challenging, but it can be done. There are no pockets on the inside. It's just a big shopping tote. I thought this would be great for kids going back and forth to college, because I know my son comes home every couple of weekends and he's always like carrying bags of stuff. And so I thought a big tote like this would be easy to take stuff back and forth. You could take it to the farmer's market. You could take it Christmas shopping. You could take it on a picnic. You could take it, I mean, I guess you could take it to the beach. It would probably get dirty, but you could make it out of like ripstop or waterproof canvas that would easily wipe sand off of it. So like I always say, the possibilities are endless. All right, let's get started. Okay, so I've gotten all of my pieces cut out of my lining fabric, my outside fabric, and my flex foam. You can use quilt batting or you could use fusible fleece if you want to. The foam is going to make this Market Shopper tote really stand up and have some structure to it. And I love working with flex foam. It's so much fun. So I have all my pieces cut out. I've got my body pieces cut out with my flex foam, and this is going to be a huge bag. So, but it doesn't actually take that much fabric, which is surprising. I've made sure that I have coordinated how you cut the pieces out of the lining fabric. You only need 1.25 yards of. So it really doesn't use that much fabric. The most expensive part of this is going to be your flex foam, but you could use quilt batting or anything that you have at home if you want to. You could even make it without batting if you wanted to. It would just be a very squishy, non-structured bag. So I've got my body, I've got my side pieces cut out, I've got my handle pieces cut out, and the handle pieces are 26 inches long, which is wider than the width of interfacing, fusible interfacing. This is SF 101. It's a non-woven interfacing that just kind of gives your quilt cotton a little bit of structure to it. But since it's wider than the fabric, instead of cutting it 26 inches long ways and then having some waste, I'm just going to piece it together. So I cut 3 strips that are the width of the straps, and I'm just going to piece it together when I fuse it to my strap pieces so that I'm saving a little bit there with some interfacing. So you could use scraps, you can just piece it together. And then I have my square that I'm going to make my continuous binding out of. So the outside of the fabric is going to be this, the outside of the bag is going to be this gingham fabric, and then the flowers is going to be the lining, the handles, and the bias. So the bias is going to go on the outside of the bag, so you'll see those two together. So it'll be really cute. Now the flex foam pieces are actually cut. Let me show you this. The foam pieces are actually cut 2 inches shorter than your fabric pieces. So that is so that you can quilt this on here, and then you're going to have your outside fabric fold over, down over into the inside at the top. So it is shorter than your actual fabric pieces, but I will show you that when we get to that step. Now that we have all of our pieces ironed, I am going to mark my quilting lines on here. Now you can quilt this any way you want. You could do diagonals, you could do free motion quilting. I'm just going to do 2-inch squares because since this is gingham, I think squares will look great on here. So you can use any kind of marking tool. I have this chalk pencil. It's like a mechanical pencil that the chalk comes out of. Got these on Amazon. You can use a marking tool like this, which I'm kind of new to. I think it's called a Hera marker or something like that. And it basically just makes a crease in your fabric, but I'm worried that once I start sewing the foam that these creases are going to spread out and not stay where they're supposed to be. So we're going to use the chalk pencil. And I'm just going to mark on here every 2 inches. That way I can see all of my quilting lines. And then I'm going to go 2 inches this way. I'm also going to use my quilting guide on my sewing machine, which will make it easy too. Okay, once you have all your quilting lines marked on your pieces, then you're going to take your lining piece and you're going to do it wrong side up. You're going to put your foam piece, and then you're going to sandwich your outside piece with the right side up. So you want the wrong sides of your fabrics touching. And then you're just going to pin all over this to make sure that none of it is going to shift when you sew it. This is where some of the spray basting would come in handy, because it would make things stick together and then they wouldn't shift so bad. So I'm just going to go along here and I'm going to pin across some of these lines so I can sew down these lines, and then I'm going to quilt it. I'm going to do the same thing for the other side piece and then the big piece. I think on the big piece though, instead of drawing all the lines on there, I'm going to find the center line of both the vertical and horizontal and press that with my iron and make a good crease on that, and then mark it with my chalk pencil. And then I'm going to sandwich them together and pin all over. And then I'm going to use my quilting guide on my machine to make sure I'm getting the lines straight. So once you have all of these pieces sandwiched and pinned, you can take it over to your sewing machine and you're going to sew along these lines, quilting all of these pieces. And then once you have them quilted, then sew along the outside edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to seal up the edges of all of your pieces. You do want to quilt together the overlap where it hangs past the foam, because what we're going to do with that is we're going to treat that as one layer, and we're going to end up folding it to the inside to make the top edge binding. All right, don't look at the mess in the background. Okay, this is how it should look once it is all pinned together. I have my lining fabric with my foam sandwiched in between the outside fabric, and I have put pins all over it so that it won't, hopefully won't shift too much when I'm quilting it. I do suggest on a big piece like this using some sort of basting spray or fusible foam. Mine is just not the fusible one. They do make a fusible flex foam. Then that way your fabric won't shift too much while you're quilting it. All right, we're going to take it over to the machine and we're going to sew along this center line to start with, and then we're going to quilt 2-inch lines all the way across, and then we're going to go this way on the center line and then 2 inches out from there. All right, if you've never used a quilting guide on your machine before. I'll do a close-up of it in just a minute. It's a bar that attaches to your presser foot that sticks out, and you can put it on either side, I think. Actually, mine only goes on this side. But you can adjust this little thing out so that this little foot will run along one of the lines after you've sewn your first line to keep it spaced out. Mine is almost off the end of this line, so you may want to check and see how far wide yours goes before you decide on which size squares to draw on your fabric. But we're going to go with that. I'm going to lengthen my stitches to about a 5, and I'm just going to quilt all the way down the center line. So for the first one, I'm going to watch this line where my presser foot and needle are. But after that, I'm going to watch the line on the seam guide. You want to kind of smooth the fabric out of the way as you're sewing so that you don't get any puckers in there. So now I'm going to take this line and I'm going to line it up with my seam guide. I'm just going to check the back and make sure that everything's still looking smooth on the back. And I'm going to line this little line that I just sewed, and I'm going to put this seam guide kind of down in the ditch of that line, and that should get me lined up with the next line. So I'm just going to sew right down there. Mine is barely hanging on because it just barely gets to 2 inches on this one. So just check, make sure your seam guide goes out wide enough before you decide on which size squares you're going to do. Okay, now that I have all of my squares quilted, I'm going to sew along the edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, closing up my piece. Okay, then your piece is all sewn together one piece. So just check and make sure you don't have any major puckers or any bunching or anything on the front and the back, and then you can go through and you can trim all of these little scraggly threads and move on to your next piece. All right, a little tip for when you are quilting something this big. I am not a quilter, I'm a bag maker, so but it helps if you roll up one side of it as you're feeding it through your machine. This can be quite large and quite cumbersome to work with. You also want to start right on the very edge of your fabric so that your quilting will go all the way to the edge of both sides and quilt off the other side. If you need to use a small little scrap as a leader piece, you can do that, and then just clip it off and reuse it for each edge. My machine's pretty good about starting right at the very edge, but if yours is a little finicky, you can use a leader piece. If you roll up this side, you can hold it tight to get it through the throat of your machine. This is a quilting machine, so it does have quite the space in between here. Most domestic machines won't have this much room, so you will need to roll this up. And just go slow, smooth out your fabric as you're going to make sure there's no bunching, and take out your pins when you get to them. All right, I have gotten all of my horizontal lines quilted on here, and now I'm going to do all of my vertical lines. When you're doing this, you will quilt a line or two off of where the foam ends inside there. You want to keep doing that because when we fold this over in further steps, you want your stitching pattern to go all the way around it. So now I'm going to do the vertical lines. I know this is super cumbersome, and I know it's kind of hard to hold on to, especially if you have a domestic machine that's not this big on the inside. Just roll it up tight. Go slow, smoothing your fabric out. This is more of like an intermediate or a super adventurous beginner pattern. These steps are not hard to do. They're just a little cumbersome to work with, but you can do it. You can do it. Just go slow. You can do it. Okay, now that you have quilted all of your pieces, you may have some scraggly sides, whatever. The sides might look a little messy. Just take your ruler and your rotary cutter and straighten them up. Clean up any parts that might have shifted a little bit, stray threads, all of that. You can also do that with your scissors, but a rotary cutter and a straight edge makes it really easy to get it really straight. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to work on our straps. So meet me over at the ironing board. All right, our straps are just going to be super simple. We're going to fold them in half long ways, or hot dog style, and press them in half. You're basically going to make a big piece of binding for the strap. So fold it in half, make a crease, open it back up, and you're going to fold the raw edges in to touch in the middle at that crease and press them again. You can do one side or both sides at the same time, however it's easiest for you. And then you're going to fold it back in half, hot dog style again, and give it a really good press. This will make sure that all of the raw edges are enclosed in your straps. They should end up being 1 inch wide. And then we're going to take these over to our sewing machine and we're going to stitch right along the edge at 1/8 of an inch on both sides. So 1/8 of an inch from the edge on both sides all the way down. And we'll just repeat that on both. All right, now that we've got it all quilted and all of the edges cleaned up, we're going to take the short edge and you can feel where the foam is, where it ended over here. Should be approximately 2 inches down. It may be a little bit shorter if you've trimmed off a lot from that edge. So we're going to fold this back along where the edge of that foam is, and we're going to fold it under. And you want this binding strip at the top to be about 1 inch long. So just tuck in your raw edge to where it measures 1 inch wide. And you're going to pin it all the way across. If you have less than what I have on here, do the best you can to get it about 1 inch wide along here. And then you're going to take your strap, and I like to have the part that used to be open facing the inside. And you want to make sure that your strap is not twisted. And you're going to insert that into this binding. And you're going to measure 4 inches away from the center mark and line up your strap with the 4-inch mark. So move that one out just a little bit. You can pin those in place or clip them if you want to make sure they don't shift when you sew. Because sometimes sticking a pin through all of that is a little cumbersome. And then you're going to take this to your machine and you're going to sew right along this edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then once you've got that sewn, you're going to fold your strap up and hold it in place and then sew 1/8 of an inch from this outside edge and catch your strap in that way. So then your strap will be sewn in 2 different spots, and that will add a little bit of strength to your strap. Okay, now once you have your straps sewn on, they should look something like this. We're going to take the side pieces and the part that where the foam ends. We're going to do the same thing where we fold it down and we pin this to where it looks, where it's about 1 inch wide. It should match the same width at whatever you did this piece at. And you're going to pin that, sew it the same way, 1/8 of an inch this way and 1/8 of an inch from the edge this side. Do both of those and then we'll be ready to put the whole bag together. One thing I forgot to tell you to do before you clip your side to your bag, on the bottom edge you need to measure 3/8 of an inch up and in from the side and the bottom and make a dot. That's where your pivot point is going to be when you're sewing this. So do that on both of the bottom corners of your bag before you clip it to your bag. And then clip it, and I will show you how to sew it. Okay, now that you have the top edge of all of your pieces finished, we're going to put the bag together. So we're going to put our sides on, and you're going to sew this backwards than you would think. So we're going to do basically the wrong sides together, so the lining sides together, so that the seam will be on the outside, because then we're going to make bias binding with our lining fabric and bind those seams so that you have a little bit of the lining fabric peeking out on the outside. You could do it the other way around if you wanted to and have all the seams on the inside. Either way is fine, but I designed it to where the seams were on the outside. So you're going to match up the tops of your pieces, and you want to make sure that this bottom seam where you did the fold over matches up so it all looks nice and neat on the inside, and make sure the top edge matches. And then you're just going to clip it or pin it. I like these clips, especially with this foam. It makes it way easier. You're going to clip it all the way down the side, and then you're going to start on the other top edge and match up those folds and clip it all the way down the side. And then we're going to clip the bottom of it. And when you're sewing this on your machine, you're going to sew it so that you can continuously sew all the way around. Let me show you how you're going to do that. So clipping that on, and then we're going to clip the bottom edge. So you kind of have to tuck the corner up in there a little bit. I like to clip the middle first and then work my way out to the corner. And when we're sewing this, we're going to sew it with the, you're going to sew it with the body side down and the side going this way. So we're going to sew down here, and then when we get down to this corner, we're going to rotate our bag and sew this way, and then rotate it again and sew this way, pivoting at these corners. It'll kind of round the corners a little bit. We'll come back and we'll trim all this up to where it's nice and clean, and then we're going to make our bias tape. So clip both sides of your bag together, and then take it over the machine and sew it along that edge. All right, once you have that marked and clipped to your bag, we're going to sew it with the body side down and the side going vertical. Let's see if I can do this without hitting the tripod. This bag is getting quite big. So we're going to sew this at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So that's where this little quilting guide comes in handy, because you can set it to your mark and then keep the edge of the bag on that guide. They also make magnetic ones. I just haven't had luck with that because mine's not super flat right here where the screws are. You're going to back stitch at the beginning and the end, and you're just going to sew down the side of your bag, making sure you got both layers in there at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now when you're getting close down here to this corner where that little mark is, I take out the next clip so that I can pull the body of my bag, maybe even the next two clips. So I can pull the body of my bag flat. That just makes it a little bit easier to see where this dot is. So you're just going to keep stitching until you get to that dot, and then you're going to put your needle down, and then you're going to rotate and pivot your corner and rotate your bag vertically. I'm going to keep it out of the way so you can see with the camera. You want to make sure that your needle is down so that nothing shifts. And then you're going to straighten it back out, and you're going to sew across the bottom and take out maybe those next two clips so that you can do the same thing on this side. You're going to get the body of your bag flattened out so that you can see where this dot, when this dot's coming up. And then put your needle down on that dot, lift your presser foot, and pivot it around, matching the sides back up. It helps too if you kind of hold back here and keep this nice and straight and a little bit taut. That way everything stays straight. I like to push down right in front of the presser foot to get the foam to go down so that it doesn't wrinkle the fabric. And when you get back around to the beginning, be sure you back stitch so that it's nice and secure. Now we're going to take our scissors and we're going to clean up these edges, and then we're going to go make our bias binding. All right, we are almost done. I have made my own binding strips using my continuous binding tutorial that I'm going to include with this pattern. It comes with a video that you can watch so that you can make a big long strip of binding for this, or you can use store-bought bias tape if you want to. I'm going to do this backwards to popular belief because when you're sewing something that's like foamy like this, it has a tendency to squish down and shift. And if you do it the traditional method where you sew the binding to the right side and then fold it back around to the back and then stitch in the ditch, sometimes you won't catch the edge of it when you're stitching in the ditch. So we're going to do it backwards. And you're going to stitch on the front to where you know that you've caught all the edges of your binding, and then the stitching looks pretty on the front. So we're going to take the right side of our binding and we're going to put it on to the right side of our bag, and you're going to sew it at 1/4 inch. Now I have trimmed all of my seams down to 1/4 inch so they're nice and clean, and then we're going to stitch our binding on at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you've got that stitched on, then we can fold it around to the front and clip it, and we're going to sew right along the edge of this on the front side so that you can see that you're catching it and that the stitching looks good where you're going to be looking at. So I'm going to take this over to my machine and I'm going to use my clips and I'm going to clip this all the way around, and then I'm going to stitch it right sides together on the side of portion of my bag first at 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, we are going to add our bias binding. I can do this without clipping it. Okay, let's pause Bigfoot there. I can usually put this on without clipping it, so we're going to try that. But if you're not a seasoned pro, I would definitely clip every step of this. All right, I have plenty, so I can cut off where this bias joined. I'll just snip that off. So we're going to sew this on the side portion first, with the right sides together to the side portion at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now we've trimmed our seam down to about 1/4 inch, so you can just sew right along where you can feel that stitching line all the way around. Go very slow and methodical, especially down around the corner. You also want to leave about 1/4 to 1/2 inch above the beginning of the seam so that you have enough to fold over for the next step. And I like to use my seam guide so that I can kind of tell that I'm at 1/4 inch, but you can feel where this stitching line is. Now this portion is big and bulky and will shift on you, so go slow so that you can keep a hold of it. When I was doing the other side, I started to go a little bit quicker because I was getting overconfident, and the whole bag got stuck on my desk and shifted, and it went the whole train came off the tracks. So just go slow. You can kind of feel where you're stitching and adjust as you go. I hope you guys can see. I'm having a hard time getting a good camera angle to where either my head is not in the way or my hands are not in the way. So when you get down to the corner, you're going to go until you kind of feel where that pivot is. And then you're going to turn your bag vertically and pivot the corner. And then just keep stitching where you can feel that stitching line. If you ever get a chance to get a machine that has this knee lever over here, oh, you can't see it, it's out of the shot. This has a knee lever that puts the presser foot up and down. That is a game changer. Also, where you can position your needle to stop in the down position every time, that is a game changer too. So if you're in the market for a sewing machine, look for those two features. All right, I'm at the next corner. I'm going to pivot my whole bag as I turn the corner. And then we're going to sew all the way up this side. Also, don't pull on your bias binding because it will stretch it because it is cut on the bias. All right, and then we're going to trim this off about a quarter to a half above it. So you'll have a good little strip left when you get done. Now we're going to take this and we're going to wrap it around. So I've got lots of stray threads in here. So we're going to flip this around to the other side and make sure that it's caught all the way in there. I see a little spot right here that's pretty close to the edge. I'm going to sew over that one more time just to be sure that it's not going to come unsewn. There we go. That looks better. So we're going to wrap this around to the other side. And when you do this, I kind of like to start here on the corner, on the bottom. I like to pull it tight and then just fold this, making sure I'm still in camera, fold this bias binding down and tuck it in to where this is just going to cover that original stitching line where you stitched it on. Traditionally, that's how you would do it, and then you would stitch from this side in the ditch, catching this edge. But since this is so big and puffy and it likes to shift around, that's why I'm doing it backwards. I have suggested cutting and making your bias strip wide enough to where you have plenty to play with to tuck it and fold it in to get it to wrap around. So you have plenty to work with here for your seam allowance. So I'm just going to keep wrapping this around, clipping it, and then we're going to sew it from the front side. Okay, when you get to the end, you're going to take your bias binding and you're going to fold it over that seam end there, and then fold it down and then wrap it around. And I like to make sure that on this side that I don't have any of these little tails sticking out or little ears sticking out. So I just kind of tuck those in there and any loose threads. So you want the end of it to look pretty. Let me see if I can turn this around and do this the right way. So we're going to fold it over that seam allowance and then fold this over that way. And then you'll have a nice pretty end. And when you're wrapping this around to the other side, you want to make sure that it is covering this stitching line. And then we're going to sew right along this edge all the way around. I'm sewing it at about 1/8 of an inch from that folded edge, and I just keep tucking it to make it nice and straight as I go. I have an 1/8 inch presser foot on my machine, so that makes that sewing little tiny seams really easy. Once again, go slow. Your bag is going to try to fight you, but that's okay. Just keep going. You'll win. And then when you get to the corner, it's going to curve. So you're just going to kind of go slow and go around that curve, trying to keep that edge over that stitching line. And there's a little spot back here that slipped, but that's okay. If you ever are lifting your presser foot and putting your fingers near here, take your foot off of the pedal so you don't accidentally make the needle go and sew over your finger. I have done that before, and lesson learned. You can also use a tool called a stiletto to keep your fingers away from the needle. I just find it hard to do. I've sewn for so long just sticking my fingers in there that the stiletto makes it a little harder for me, actually. Okay, we came around that second corner and got a stray thread we're going to tuck up underneath there. And we are on the home stretch. All right, we can trim all our little threads and we are done. All right, we are done. Look at this fantastic, cute bag. It's sturdy enough to carry lots of stuff. It'll stand up on its own. It's big enough to take with you shopping, to the market, or to the dog park, if that's something you do. Isn't it cute? And then the inside has the lining. It's got the border at the top. All of our seams are finished with binding. It's got some sturdy straps you can throw over your shoulder and take it with you. I think on mine, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this fabric or some coordinating fabric and make a little tag here and add one of my business tags on there that has my name on it. You could do so many things with this. Maybe I'll embroider my monogram on it. So yeah. So that is the Market Shopper Tote. Be sure that if you make one that you tag me on all the social media. I'm at By the Bay Bag Co. on everything, so I can see all of your creations with this wonderful pattern. And be sure to subscribe and click that bell so that you're notified when a new pattern comes out. My goal is to do one new pattern every week for this whole year. So there should be 52 new patterns by the end of the year. And I've started off with some very easy ones, beginner ones, and we're working our way up to a little bit more advanced beginner or an intermediate pattern. I would definitely say this would need a confident beginner because of the foam makes it a little bit tricky to maneuver, but it's super, the design is super easy, but maneuvering the foam is a little bit more tricky. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Be sure to follow me on all the social media. I'm on Instagram and I'm on TikTok and Pinterest and all the things at By the Bay Bag Co. So thank you guys so much for watching.